What was supposed to be a normal follow-up in the Nancy Guthrie investigation has now turned into something far more alarming. Detectives reportedly went out to speak with Tommaso Cioni about newly developing evidence, but instead of finding someone waiting to answer questions, they found absence. He was gone, and he may not have been the only one. Dominic Evans has also seemingly disappeared from sight, pushing this already disturbing case into an even more unsettling phase. How do two names that have been pulled so tightly into one of the most talked about cases suddenly vanish from their own homes? That question is now hanging over everything, and the deeper you go into this story, the darker it gets. To understand why that development hit so hard, you have to go back to the night Nancy Guthrie was last seen. In almost every missing person investigation, attention naturally settles on the last known person to be with the victim. In Nancy's case, that person was Tommaso Cioni, the man married to her daughter Annie. From the beginning, that detail stood out, but over time it became more than just a point in the timeline. It became the center of gravity in the case. Suspicion did not explode all at once. It built slowly, piece by piece, as more details started circling back to the same people and the same places. And now, with Cioni reportedly no longer at home just as investigators wanted to speak with him again, that suspicion feels heavier than ever. It doesn't look random, it looks deliberate. It looks like movement before pressure closes in. Nancy Guthrie was last seen on Saturday night, January 31st, 2026, at her home in the Catalina foothills outside Tucson. She had been dropped off at about 9:50 p.m. by Cioni. After that moment, no one could definitively place eyes on her again. The next morning, concern rose quickly when Nancy failed to appear for a church live stream she was expected to join. This was not the kind of thing people around her would casually dismiss. It was unusual enough to trigger immediate concern. A church member contacted the family, and before long, that concern turned into action. By roughly 11 o'clock a.m., relatives were at Nancy's home, searching the house and property for anything that might explain where she was. But there was nothing. No sign that she had stepped away, no clue that she had gone anywhere by choice, no simple answer waiting behind a door. By noon, a 911 call made it official. Nancy Guthrie was now a missing person. When deputies arrived, the scene only deepened the concern. Her belongings were still there. Her phone remained inside. So did the items she regularly used day to day. That mattered, especially because Nancy had limited mobility. This did not look like someone who had quietly left on her own. Investigators quickly moved away from treating it like a standard disappearance because almost nothing about it felt standard. From the start, there was a growing sense that whatever happened had happened at the house. The response expanded fast. Local, state, and federal agencies all moved in. Search teams, dogs, drones, aerial support, and help from U.S. Customs and Border Protection turned the area into a major search operation. It was broad, coordinated, and urgent. But for all of that effort, there was still no sign of Nancy. Then, only 2 days later, the case shifted in a major way. On February 2nd, what had begun as a missing person investigation was formally reclassified as a criminal case. Sheriff Chris Nanos made clear that this decision was not based on instinct or public pressure. It was based on evidence collected inside the home. Something had taken place there, something serious enough for homicide investigators to step in and for the property to be treated as a crime scene. At that point, the idea that Nancy had simply walked away was no longer being taken seriously. Investigators believed she had likely been taken from the home, possibly overnight and against her will. Given her physical condition, the possibility of her traveling far on her own never fit the facts. The scene pointed somewhere else. It pointed to removal. As the investigation widened, the FBI joined in, bringing added resources and a broader reach. Nancy was classified as a vulnerable adult, not because of memory problems or cognitive decline, but because of her age, mobility issues, and need for daily medication. Time mattered. Every passing hour narrowed possibilities. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage, pulled electronic records, went door to door through the neighborhood, and tried to build a timeline that actually held together. But even with all of that, answers remained out of reach. Then came the evidence that pushed the case into even more troubling territory. Bloodstains were reportedly found at or near the entrance of the home, and forensic testing later confirmed the DNA matched Nancy. Investigators also appeared to have footage suggesting a trail leading away from the front of the house, though officials did not publicly explain how much blood there was or what exactly it indicated. At the same time, more concerning details began to surface. Some of Nancy's personal belongings had been left behind. Her doorbell security camera had been removed. Those details did not feel random. They suggested intention. They suggested someone wanted to limit what could be seen, tracked, or reconstructed later. And once investigators stepped back and looked at the scene as a whole, The conclusion became difficult to avoid. This did not resemble a voluntary disappearance, not even remotely. The evidence inside and around the house pointed in one direction. Something happened there, and it set off a case that has only become more disturbing with each update. Then came one of the biggest developments yet, the missing camera and the masked man. On February 10th, investigators released surveillance footage and still images recovered from Nancy Guthrie's own doorbell camera. For the first time, the public was not just being told about a possible suspect, they were looking at one. The Nest camera itself had been reported missing after Nancy vanished, making it seem even more likely that someone had tried to remove evidence. But investigators were able to work with Google and recover material that had already been captured before the device disappeared. What that footage showed was deeply unsettling. A man wearing a ski mask approached the front door. He did not look lost. He did not wander. He moved with focus. As soon as he reached the camera, he lifted a gloved hand toward it, as if he already knew where it was and what he needed to block. When that did not fully work, he stepped away, grabbed nearby shrubbery, and tried again, attempting to cover the camera more completely. It did not look impulsive. It looked controlled, and that suggested planning. Soon after that footage was released, the FBI made their stance clear. The person seen in the video was no longer being described merely as someone investigators wanted to identify. He was being referred to as the suspect in Nancy Guthrie's kidnapping. Based on what could be observed, investigators estimated the man to be around 5'9" to 5'10", with an average build. It was not a detailed description, but it was enough to start focusing incoming tips. The FBI Phoenix office made clear that the goal was not just to generate public chatter, it was to direct attention in a useful direction. But the footage raised more questions the longer people looked at it. The man seemed to be carrying a backpack, and at one point appeared to have what looked like a gun holster near the center of his waist. That detail immediately stood out. Then another image surfaced, and the backpack and possible holster were no longer visible. That image, investigators indicated, came from a different day. Suddenly the tone changed. If that was true, then this may not have been a one-time appearance. It raised the possibility that whoever this man was, he had been near Nancy's home more than once. Watching, returning, preparing. Later, in a February 24th interview, Sheriff Nanos added another complication. The recovered images did not have timestamps, meaning investigators could not say with certainty when each image had been captured. Any timeline built from those visuals would contain some guesswork. In a case already full of uncertainty, that only made things harder. Still, some details were concrete. The suspect was seen carrying a black backpack with reflective straps, and the FBI later identified it as a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. That may sound minor, but in a case like this, even a small detail can matter. Investigators said that specific backpack is sold only at Walmart, and law enforcement was reportedly working with the retailer in hopes that purchase history or distribution information could help narrow down who bought it. While authorities kept working through the evidence, the public had already begun building its own theories. Almost immediately after the footage came out, one name kept rising to the top of online speculation: Tommaso Cioni. People started comparing the suspect's build, height, posture, and even the way the weight sat on his body to pictures of Cioni. Others claimed they could make out the shape of facial hair beneath the mask, pointing to a beard and mustache they believed resembled his. Some went further, zooming in on the hands and claiming certain bumps on the fingers matched rings Cioni had worn in older photos. Others even tried to connect the gloves in the video to wrestling-style gear because of Cioni's background. The theories kept stacking up, each one feeding the next, until a full narrative was forming online long before investigators publicly confirmed anything. Some people also dragged Nancy's daughter Annie into the speculation, arguing that both she and Cioni should be questioned more aggressively. Others pointed to the relative silence from Cioni after Nancy vanished and treated that absence as meaningful in itself. There were even side-by-side comparisons of the masked image in older photos, with some viewers insisting the face shape lined up even under the mask. But for all the confidence online, none of that has been officially confirmed, and that line still matters. Speculation is not evidence. Theories are not proof. Still, what the release of that footage undeniably did was change the pace of the case. It pushed investigators and the public into the same race toward the same question: who was at Nancy Guthrie's front door? And how many times had that person been there before the night everything changed? Then, attention shifted to another important piece of the puzzle: the vehicle investigators have refused to let go. As the case tightened, focus did not stay limited to people. It widened to anything that might hold a clue, and one object remained right in the middle of it all: a blue Honda CR-V tied to Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni. By February 24th, authorities confirmed the SUV was still in law enforcement custody. Weeks later, that had not changed. As of March 11th, the Pima County Sheriff's Department said the vehicle had still not been returned. and there was no firm date for when it would be. On paper, that might sound procedural, but in an active investigation like this, very little stays routine for long. The fact that authorities were still holding the vehicle strongly suggested one thing: it still mattered. This was not evidence they had processed and cleared. It was something they were still not done with. Officials said they were working toward returning it, but that timeline would move according to the investigation, not family convenience. And that investigation remained active. What made that even more interesting was where the vehicle was and what was allegedly happening to it. On a March 10th episode of Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, investigative reporter Dave Mack said the car was not just sitting untouched and irregular. According to him, it was at an auto shop under Sheriff's Department control. It was being examined, worked on, and taken apart in ways that suggested a much deeper forensic search. Mack said the vehicle was in the process of being put back together, which hinted at how thoroughly investigators may have gone through it piece by piece looking for anything left behind. And that matters because the CRV was one of the last places Nancy is known to have been before she disappeared. That alone made it important. But the fact that it is still being held, still being worked on, and still not cleared keeps it right at the center of the case. Whatever investigators believe could be inside that vehicle, they are clearly not finished looking for it yet. Then came a theory from someone who knew the neighborhood itself. As the official investigation continued without public answers, outside observations began filling the gaps. One of Nancy Guthrie's neighbors stepped forward with an idea that added yet another layer to the mystery, and it was based less on internet speculation and more on the physical layout of the property. Speaking to Brian Enton on his Investigate series, a neighbor named Laura focused on the front security gate at Nancy's home. According to her, it was a reinforced type of gate, similar to one she had herself, the kind built specifically to keep people out. In Laura's view, this was not something a person could quietly force open from the front without drawing attention or leaving obvious signs. That led her to question the behavior shown in the camera footage. If the masked man was standing right there at the front, what exactly was he doing? Because in the video, he does not appear to be trying to break in. He appears focused on the camera, covering it, adjusting it, controlling what it captures. He lingers long enough to imply purpose, but not in a way that suggests immediate entry. To Laura, that detail was important. It looked less like someone trying to get inside and more like someone watching. From there, her theory took shape. If the masked man was not the one entering from the front, then maybe someone else was moving from another direction, using a different way in, one not covered by the camera, one not being watched. That possibility led her to believe there may have been more than one person involved, maybe two, maybe more. Because this did not feel to her like a random act carried out by one person improvising in the dark. It felt coordinated. It felt like roles were assigned. And once that idea entered the conversation, it spread quickly online. People began trying to fit names already circulating into that multi-person theory, especially Tommaso Cioni and Dominic Evans. But just like the earlier speculation, that connection remains unconfirmed. It sits in that same uneasy space between possibility and proof, where public theories move quickly, but verified answers still lag behind. The release of the images created another chain reaction when a second name began getting pulled into the center of the case. The moment the FBI released those photos and video clips, the case took on a new urgency because now the public had something concrete to study, freeze, replay, and dissect. The footage showed a masked figure standing at Nancy's front door wearing gloves, a mask, and a backpack. In one brief moment, the eyes behind the mask were visible, making the figure feel less like a vague shadow and more like a real person standing right there. The video also appeared to show him interfering with the doorbell camera, once again reinforcing the idea of planning and awareness. FBI Director Kash Patel also noted that one of the images seemed to show a firearm holstered at the suspect's waist. That pushed the tension even higher. This was no longer just a person lurking outside a home. It was someone who may have arrived prepared. Online, the question quickly became not just what the figure was doing, but who he was. At first, most of the speculation circled back to Cioni, but then another name entered the discussion in a major way: Dominic Evans. An account called Adam Report claimed it had analyzed the footage and suggested the masked person could be Evans, who had once played in a band with Cioni. That claim leaned heavily on physical similarities, athletic build, possible facial hair, and facial proportions. The connection to Cioni made the theory spread faster because it added a direct personal link rather than a random guess. People pointed to a band called Early Black, formed in 2007, where Cioni played bass and Evans played drums alongside guitarist and vocalist Walter Igon Goncalves Jr. The band had a local presence, playing in Tucson, Phoenix, and Flagstaff, recording, and building a name regionally. It was not some hidden connection people had to dig up through obscure records. It was easy to find, and once it was found, it became another piece in the growing public narrative around the case. As the speculation grew louder, Evans came forward to address it. He said his connection to Nancy Guthrie was extremely limited. According to him, he had only met her once, years earlier in 2011, when he brought one of his children to her home for an Easter egg hunt. Beyond that, he said there was no relationship, no continued contact, and no meaningful connection to her life. Outside of that one visit, their paths did not cross. At the same time, Evans's real life stood in sharp contrast to the image people online were building around him. He was an elementary school teacher in Arizona, a person whose daily life centered around students, classrooms, and school routines. As the rumors intensified, he reportedly felt the impact not just on the internet, but in his actual environment. He asked his principal to gather staff, then explained the situation to colleagues, and told them he would need to step away for a few days. In that moment, it was not about guilt or innocence in the public imagination. It was about absorbing the weight of suddenly being dragged into a high-profile case he said he had no role in. Away from work, Evans's home life was also affected. He is married to Andrea Jacobo Evans. The two applied for a marriage license in 2012 and married in January 2013. They were living together in Morristown, Arizona, in what had been a largely private life before this case pulled cameras toward them. Andrea worked as a school principal, and like Evans, her life was rooted in structure, routine, and education. But once those images were released and the speculation spread, that privacy reportedly disappeared fast. News crews began showing up in the area. Cameras turned not just toward them, but toward neighbors and nearby homes, pushing a quiet street into the center of a public mystery. Andrea later described watching from the windows at night with the lights kept low, trying not to attract more attention from everything happening outside. And through all of that, one thing remained true. The identity of the masked figure in the footage had still not been officially confirmed. The distinction between what had been proven and what people simply believed had never mattered more. And still, the case kept pulling in more faces that ultimately did not fit. More than a month into the search for Nancy Guthrie, the investigation continued circling the same central question. Who took her? In that time, even without a confirmed suspect, several people were pulled into the spotlight as though they might be the break the case needed. Authorities detained at least 2 individuals for questioning. Both times, the attention was intense. Both times, it ended without charges, and both times, it left the public with more confusion than clarity. The first case involved Carlos Palazuelo, who was detained on the evening of February 10th in Rio Rico, about 60 miles south of Tucson. He had been working when police pulled him over during a traffic stop, but according to his later account, it did not unfold like a typical stop. In a video shared online, Palazuelo said he noticed law enforcement behind him and decided to pull over himself, not fully understanding what was happening. When officers approached, he said there was no immediate explanation, only instructions to stay still and identify himself. Before long, he was placed in a police vehicle without knowing why. He later said he was told it was connected to a kidnapping case, and his reaction, according to him, was pure disbelief. He said none of it made sense, that he had done nothing wrong, and that authorities searched both his vehicle and his home, looking for something he insisted was not there. After his release, he repeated that same message outside his house while speaking to reporters. He said he had nothing to do with Nancy's disappearance, did not even know who she was, and did not understand why he had been swept into the investigation at all. At the same time, he acknowledged that law enforcement had a job to do, while also saying they were chasing the wrong person. He wanted the real suspect found, not just for Nancy's sake, but so his own name could be cleared. Then, just a few days later on February 13th, attention shifted again, this time to a Tucson home just a couple of miles from where Nancy was last seen. SWAT officers executed a search warrant at the property where 37-year-old Luke Daly lived with his 7-to-7-year-old mother. It was the kind of scene that immediately draws cameras, raises suspicion, and sends speculation racing. Both Daly and his mother were detained while officers searched the property, and they were held for hours. But again, the result followed the same pattern. They were later released without charges. Daly's attorney said neither he nor his mother had been arrested in connection to the case and stressed that there was no link between Daly and Nancy Guthrie. The attorney also said Daly had no information about her disappearance and was, like everyone else, simply hoping for answers. When Daly later spoke publicly, he focused on how he believed the whole thing began. In an interview released on March 2nd, he said he had been questioned by both sheriff's deputies and the FBI, but maintained he knew nothing about what happened to Nancy and had no involvement at all. He said clearly that if he had information, he would have given it because he wanted the same thing everyone else wanted, Nancy found and brought home. What stood out most, though, was his belief that the attention on him had not started with evidence. He believed it started online. People began comparing his appearance to the masked person in the doorbell footage, and from there, that speculation gathered enough momentum to put him directly in investigators' sights. Daly rejected the comparison outright, saying he saw no resemblance at all, and that nothing tied him to the case beyond what strangers had decided to believe. And that is where the case remains for now. 2 detentions, more than one name dragged into the center of public suspicion, no charges that held, no confirmed suspect, just a widening trail of theories moving faster than facts. Meanwhile, the bigger question still has no answer. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Tommaso Cioni and Dominic Evans are now being talked about in an even darker context, and the timing of these latest developments has only made the entire case feel more volatile. If investigators were closing in, why are key names suddenly harder to find? If the footage points toward planning, who exactly was involved? And if this was larger than one person, how much of the real story still hasn't surfaced? Right now, the case is not getting simpler. It is getting stranger, and until investigators can separate what is real from what is rumor, this story remains one of the most disturbing and unresolved cases out there.